How to tender jobs correctly from drawings or from spec or from a bill of quants. What do we do? How do we approach it? In this video, I'm going to go through the best ways that I think you should do it, and I've got experience of pricing and tendering up to £3 million a month with a team of estimators and QSs. So I've got a balanced view on how the world really works and what's the realities of life for you, whether you're a main contractor or a subcontractor. This is the way to look at it. Now, in an ideal world, every job would have a complete tender pack. In an ideal world, there'd be nice sets of drawings, there'd be working drawings, there'd be building regulation drawings, there'll be build-ups of spec and absolutely everything in a drawing for that to show us exactly the job. And in an ideal world, there'd be a nice detailed written spec of all the specification of materials, finishes, you name it, everything written down. And then in an ideal world, there would be a bill of quantities, which is the most important thing I believe in this industry, done by a professional quantity surveyor or estimator, breaking down every piece and element of the job from the drawings, and that is the pricing document that everyone works to, every contractor works to, so there's fair, transparent pricing, that everyone's pricing from the same document, so there's like-for-like prices. But do we live in an ideal world? Well, no, not really. And does this ever happen? No, not really. A lot of the times you don't get a drawing, a lot of the times you don't get a written spec, a lot of times you don't get a bill of quantities, you get nothing. You go and look at the job, you've got to price it up, estimate it, guesstimate all the quantities yourself, and this is where it all goes wrong. Because what you allow for, your specification, could be completely different to someone else's allowances and specifications, and you end up in a shit show of just, well, you could be pricing more expensive lighting, for example, you could be pricing more expensive finishes, for example, because you're interpreting what the client wants, which is very difficult. And you've got to have that open conversation with the client initially to begin with, and go through that and go, I want to check the exact specification you want, etc., etc. But for the most time, if you're working for a reliable client like an architect or a decent sized company, they would have probably got a cost consultant involved. Like a commercial client that have got a cost consultant involved. If someone's spending a lot of money, they're likely have got a consultant involved. So you're going to have probably one or two of these. You might not have all three. If you've got all three, great. You're in the ideal world, which is quite rare. But if someone's spending a couple of £1 million, they're likely going to have all of this. But if someone's spending maybe 100 grand, you might have one of these. But on a small job, a 5 grand job, a 10 grand job, a 20 grand job, you're probably going to have nothing. But then more than likely, you're not going to be tendering against a lot of people on a smaller job. So there's swings and roundabouts when it comes to tendering. But let's just assume you're pricing a decent sized job. Let's say it's £250,000, just for argument's sake. And you've got a bill of quantities. You've got to go off that bill of quantities. You can go off drawings, but you've got to think about it from the client's point of view. Whoever's instructing you to come and tender, if they've paid a professional to do a bit of quantities, go by the professional's advice. Go off their measurements and their setup. But what I would say is, you need to look at the job and verify that bit of quantity as well, because people make mistakes. A lot of the times you'll find that some of these quantity surveyors, I'm not digging out quantity surveyors, but sometimes it's a young kid who's put a bit of quantities together. They don't fully understand how things work on site, and the practicalities of delivering the job are very different. So my advice is always look at the job yourself and scrutinise it yourself. Look at the bit of quantities and go through it. Look at the drawing, go to site, check on every single little thing. Because spending a couple more hours at the tendering stage to scrutinise every single little part of the job could save you an absolute fortune. It could save you taking on a nightmare job, and it could save you a lot of time when it comes to actually running the job, because you're on the ball and you've thoroughly written through this spec. But this is what you need to be doing. You've got to be thinking it like that, because you are taking the risk. Whenever you tender a job, when you're putting a bid in to do a job, ultimately when you win that job, you are taking a risk. So you may as well minimise that risk and fully understand the job yourself. Like I say, in an ideal world, the client will give you all of this stuff. But if they don't, you're going to have to do the homework yourself and actually sit thoroughly and work through and go through it. But what I would say is, this is where you need to be very clear that when you submit a bill of quantities, or whether it's been given to you as a framework or you set your own bill of quantities, make it very clear things like exclusions. So you've not allowed for certain things that you've found problems, potential issues with that, and you list out recommendations as well. Because again, what the drawings and the spec might say, you might know an easier, quicker way, cheaper way of doing it, and you recommend that to the client as well. So you're giving value. You're tendering opportunities, a time to sell yourself and actually provide a lot of value. It's not just about pricing. It's about you communicating with the people that you're submitting the price to, that you're giving them a lot of value because you're going through this stuff. And then what are you doing? If you say to a client, I'd recommend you do this, this and this because of this, this and this, like a particular way of fitting something or a particular method of doing something, because you're the expert. You're positioning yourself as the expert, which means they're more than likely going to want to choose you if the other people tendering haven't pointed those things out, because you immediately look like you know what you're talking about, because you do know what you're talking about. You flagged it as an issue. You've got to do this. And the biggest thing I've found in this industry is a lot of people don't allocate enough time to tender. And you have to. You've got to spend the time on it. You've got to get the advice. And you've got to think from the point of view of running a big job. Let's say it's that £250,000 job. Again, in an ideal world, there would be a architect, maybe an interior designer, someone from building control, a structural engineer, maybe a specialist fire engineer, maybe a specialist mechanical and electrical engineer having all their inputs. But a lot of the times the client won't have this. So you've got to sort of do the job for them, which is just the industry. It's just how it is. Like, we can't change that. So the only way we're going to be able to do it and handle it is actually look at jobs properly ourselves. The more experience you get and the more time you spend looking at the drawings properly, understanding the written spec and actually going through a bill of quantities properly, it's the only way. It's the only way you're going to be able to do it. And the key thing is, you've just got to be very, very careful that when you tender jobs, be very clear on it. If you win the job, what does the contract say? What contract is it going to run to? What does the order say? What are they going to hold you to? Because if you've missed stuff off the bill of quantities and they've put it in the order that, well, you've seen it as it is for what it is and it's all your responsibility, you're then again taking a risk. You've got to understand that and understand your client. I think this is a big thing of when you decide to tender a project, look at your client first. You know, think about who is the actual client. Are they a credible client? Are they going to, one, pay you? Are they, one, going to be easy to work with? You know, what's the relationship like to make this easier? But I've found that the better that you have upfront conversations and over communicate and go through every single part of tendering a job, the easier it's going to be. But with that being said, I always think this is a bit of a debate with tendering. What comes first, drawings or bill of quants? For me, I always like to think that bill of quants comes first, because again, a professional has sat there, a cost consultant has sat there and broken down the job, and that's how they've deemed it and that's how they've interpreted it. Because your architects are your design fairies. They're detail led, they're more focused on drawings. But a cost consultant, a proper one, a good one, will give you a good, decent, honest, solid breakdown of a bill of quantities, because he understands the practicalities of delivering it on site a bit more than maybe the architect. But that's the way you want to attack tendering. You always want to attack it on both parts, but you've got to spend the time on it. That's the biggest lesson I'm giving you in this video. You've got to spend the time tendering. It's the most important thing that you'll do. All right, guys, hope that's been useful. If you'd like more free content, there's a link below this video for my podcast, Construction Entrepreneur, loads of free advice, tactical, practical, real, say it how it is advice on everything to do with this business, from recruitment to getting more leads, to getting better work, to making more profitability, being a better leader. Check it out, it's on the link below.